Welcome to part one of our elections and campaigns videos. This one is going to be focusing on voting, citizenship, and immigration. Let's get started. All right, so let's talk voting history in the United States and how suffrage and enfranchisement, which is another term for voting. Suffrage is also a term for another term for right to vote, has expanded in the United States. So you need to remember that the 10th Amendment, states get the power to set voter qualifications because 10th Amendment is the federalism amendment and basically establishes that any power not granted to Congress is automatically reserved for the state or the people. And so in this case, because there is no mention of voter qualifications given to the federal government, then those things get left to the states, except where amendments take place. So first and foremost, the adoption of the Constitution sees that states drop a religious requirement. So there were many states during the colonial era that said that you had to belong to a certain religion to be able to vote. This was very popular in the Puritan areas of Massachusetts. During the 1830s, during the Jackson administration, the requirement to own property was dropped. So now we were at just having to be a white male 21 years of age or older. So the property requirement had been there to kind of establish that people were going to have a stake in society. If you owned property, you had a bigger stake in society. But they dropped that to allow more of the common man to have the ability to vote. The 15th Amendment was passed just after the Civil War, which granted black males the right to vote. The 19th Amendment then was passed in 1920, or ratified, I should say, not passed, but ratified. And this is where women were granted or gained the right to vote with the ratification of that amendment. In the 1960s, we had the Voting Rights Act, which established that states, certain states who had a history of discrimination in voting, had to have federal clearance. You couldn't do intimidation. You could not restrict a person from voting based on race, religion, ethnicity, or sex. The 23rd Amendment granted the District of Columbia electoral votes, so this would allow the citizens of DC to have a say in the president. The 24th Amendment eliminated poll taxes, so this allowed individuals that were poor or in poverty to the ability to vote, because no longer were they going to have to pay. So oftentimes, at some points in time, you had to pay a tax or you had to pay for the ballot itself. And if you did not have that extra money, then you wouldn't be able to vote. So the 24th Amendment removed those barriers. And then the 26th Amendment dropped the voting right or the voting age to 18. And it all had to do with the Vietnam War, that if you were old enough to fight for this country, you should be old enough to vote on who potentially was going to send you to fight in a war. All right, so qualifications to vote. So federal requirements to vote. So what does the federal government, either through the Constitution, amendments, or law, establish? And it's really the law, or really the Constitution and amendments that establish this. You have to be at least 18 years of age. States can deny a person a right to vote under the age of 18. They can actually allow a person under the age of 18 to vote if the state so allows. You must be a citizen of the United States, either by birth or naturalized, and we will talk about what that means here in just a moment. And then they need to be a resident of the state in which they are voting. So you have to somehow establish residency. Every state has kind of a different requirement. At some points in our history, that residency requirement was a full year, but for most states today in 2020, 2022, it's like a month, maybe 6 months at most, but most states you have to be a resident living there for at least 30 days. Now, states can have additional requirements because, again, the 10th Amendment, if it's not granted to this power, the power was not granted to Congress, therefore it belongs to the states or the people. And so in this case, the states have established additional requirements. Federalism. So registration requirement in Oklahoma, it is 24 days. Some states have 15, some states have 30 days. Some states are like, you can register the same day. You must register, but you can register the same day. Only North Dakota does not have a registration requirement. The states may ask for a political affiliation. They'll ask what to register with a party, and the reason for this is because of the primary election, to help decide who the candidate will be for each of the political parties. So if you haven't registered, not all states require that you identify your political affiliation, and not all states say that you are limited in what primary you can vote on based on your registration either. States can require that you have no felonies. If you've been convicted of a felony, you potentially could lose your right to vote in many states. In the state of Oklahoma is one of those. You can get it back, but it is a time period post-conviction on that felony. The state of Vermont is one of a couple that actually allow prisoners themselves to vote. Most states do not allow prisoners to vote, and then not be declared mentally incompetent by a court of law. So a court of law has not determined, if a court of law has determined that you are mentally incompetent, then you would lose your right to vote. As soon as a court of law would determine that you are mentally competent, then you could get your right to vote back. Now, we talked about how to be able to vote, you needed to be a citizen, and you can get citizenship either by birth or naturalization. There is a great iCivics lesson to kind of process all this information if you want to go search that out. But let's talk about citizenship by birth. There are two ways that we get citizenship by birth. Us sole, which is born on U.S. soil. So in the 50 states or territories, you have to be born in one of the 50 states or territory. If you are born on a military base anywhere in the world, or if you're born in an embassy, all of those places are considered U.S. soil, and you would a baby, an individual born there, would automatically get citizenship to the United States. But then there's a second way in the United States called us sanguinis, which is by blood. So if you are born to a U.S. citizen. Now there are some additional requirements. Both your parents are U.S. citizens and you get it automatically. If only one has, then that one has to have lived in the United States at certain points in time. But at least one parent has to have U.S. citizenship. It doesn't matter where you're born, as long as one parent is a U.S. citizen at the time that you are born. This method may lead to dual citizenship. You may be granted citizenship in another country as well as the United States through this method. Many countries only have one of these ways. They either have by soil or by blood. United States is one of the few countries that have citizenship granted through both methods. Now, citizenship, you can also get citizenship through naturalization, meaning you are not born a citizen. You immigrated to the United States and are seeking to become a naturalized citizen. So to become a naturalized citizen, you have to be at least 18 years of age. You needed to be a permanent resident for 5 years. You had to have that status granted to you by the federal government for 5 years. You must be of good character. The definition for good character is, kind of vague, but typically you are not in trouble with the law, so you're law abiding, you are involved in the community that you live within. Those sorts of things would be the good character. You can speak English. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be fluent, but you need to be able to communicate in English somewhat. You may need to pass the naturalization test and the interview. This is where they check to see your knowledge of U.S. history and standards and symbols and those sorts of things, as well as see if the speaking of English is also tested through here. The naturalization test has a possible of 100 questions, and an applicant will be given asked 10 of them, and they will have to answer 6 of them correctly. The United States Immigration Services has all 100 possible questions published on their website, along with the acceptable answers. They will then have to take the oath of allegiance whenever it is offered. In this state of Oklahoma, for Oklahoma City, the federal court, the last Friday of every month, does a oath of allegiance ceremony at noon, and then they will need to pay the $725 application fee. Now, the thing is, actually, this for naturalization, you're talking much more than $725. It runs, $10,000 or more, really, because you oftentimes will need to use a lawyer, among other things. Now, once naturalized, a person is granted all the same rights and responsibilities of a person born a citizen. The only exception to that is they are not allowed to be president. You must be a natural born citizen to be president. And a person that gains citizenship through naturalization can have that citizenship taken away. A natural born citizen cannot have their citizenship taken away, but a naturalized citizen can, depending on the situation. So, let's talk about the rights and responsibilities. This is for everybody, but this is what happens when we talk about a naturalized citizen gets the same rights and responsibilities. So the rights of a citizen, they get the right to vote in federal elections and even state elections, and they have the right to run for federal office. So they can be a Congress member, senator, House of Reps, those sorts of things. They could even potentially be a judge. Responsibilities of citizens means that they will obey the law. They will serve on a jury. Jury duty is required. If you get called for it, you have to serve. It is your duty. Everyone should know that they're going to get that is facing criminal charges is going to have a jury of their peers. And then currently males must register with the Selective Service. That will probably be changing, that all individuals between the ages of 18 and 26 will need to register for the Selective Service, and the Selective Service is what is used if ever Congress passes a draft law and we have to draft individuals. Due to changes in military restrictions, essentially the removal of restrictions, all females now are allowed to enter all parts of the military. They will start to be included in the Selective Service. Okay, how can you lose your citizenship? So you can renounce. If you're a natural born citizen, you can renounce your citizenship, or you lose your citizenship if you're naturalized, if you run for public office in a foreign country. Certain conditions apply. Under military service in a foreign country, certain conditions. Apply for citizenship in a foreign country with the intention of giving up your U.S. citizenship. That's essentially you're renouncing your citizenship. Or you commit an act of treason against the United States. The committed act of treason against the United States only loses naturalized citizenship. Okay? None of those things can lose your U.S. citizenship if you're natural born. Okay, a person that gains citizenship through naturalization can have that citizenship taken away in rare instances in which you gained naturalization illegally. You pretended to be someone who you were not. Okay, you got it through false means. You withheld certain facts, like maybe you didn't disclose that you had a criminal record in your home country. That could potentially cause you to lose your citizenship to the United States, or if you are associated with certain groups, typically terrorist groups. All right. Now, let's talk about voters. So to be able to vote, you have to be a citizen. And we went over the ways that you became a citizen in this country. Now, let's talk about the type of voters that we have in the United States. So there's what is called a qualified voter. And this is someone who meets all state and federal requirements and is registered to vote and does vote. Okay, so a qualified voter can vote, is qualified to vote, and they actually do. They show up and they cast a ballot with frequency. Okay, that's a qualified voter. A non-voter is someone who meets all the requirements but chooses not to vote and has no justification for that. Okay, oftentimes they think my vote won't matter, so there's no point in going to vote. Okay, I have no idea who the candidates are. I can't figure out who the best candidate would be, so it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't count. I'm just not going to do it. That's a non-voter. An unqualified voter is someone who does not meet the qualifications and therefore is barred from voting. And then a cannot voter is someone who meets all state and federal requirements but fails to vote because of a justifiable reason. So this is different than a non-voter. A non-voter could vote but chooses not to and has no legit reason why. A cannot voter can vote but doesn't because something came up. They suddenly got ill and they couldn't make it to the ballot. They couldn't make it to the polling place. They all of a sudden had to travel unexpectedly for whatever reason. They may be unemployed and cannot get to the polling place. They can't pay for the bus fare. They can't pay for the Uber, they can't pay for the gas to get them there. They may have a work schedule conflict. Maybe they're working, the hours they're working makes it really difficult for them to get to the polling place during operations. They might be incarcerated. That would be someone who is allowed but can't. And then because incarceration is different than, having a felony on probation. And then local pressure not to vote. So there is pressure within your community to not vote. You would vote totally, but it's not seen as acceptable within your community. This also can include religious reasons. So Jehovah's Witnesses do not vote because it is their religion says that it is against their religion to participate in elections like that. They also do not pledge the allegiance to the flag. They don't say the Pledge of Allegiance because they cannot pledge their allegiance to anybody but God. All right, so that is all for these sets of notes. Hopefully you were able to fill out your note form that was handed out in class. If you do not have that, make sure you get it and get it filled out. If you have any questions, come see me, and don't do anything too stupid. Bye, guys.